Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into this book, Alchemia do Amor, which I think translates to like the alchemy of love.
Yeah, something like that.
It was suggested by a listener who is looking for some new perspectives on depression. So
Always a good thing.
that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to unpack the author's ideas, see if we can make sense of what depression is, where it might come from, and how maybe healing is possible. We'll be looking at a lot of ground here: emotions, spirituality, relationships, how society plays a role, the whole thing.
Yeah, the author really takes a broad view, looking at all these different factors, which I think is actually really important because it emphasizes just how complex this experience of depression can be, right?
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Exactly. So, right off the bat, this concept of internal alchemy really grabbed my attention. What do you make of that?
Well, it's like, imagine this, like hidden workshop inside you where all your feelings and your deepest desires are constantly mixing and reacting. It's this like ongoing process, almost like, well, alchemy, right? Transforming one thing into another. And love is like the essential ingredient in this process.
So, without love, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Well, yeah, it's more like without that outward flow of love, without that connection to something beyond yourself, that's when the problems start to arise. And that's actually a big part of his whole approach to healing, too, actively cultivating love and connection.
Okay, that's really interesting. And on the flip side of that, we have, well, depression. And the author, Adenauer Noves, describes it in some pretty heavy terms. Fear taking root deep inside us, in our unconscious. But it's not meant to just stay there. He says it needs to be transformed, like alchemized into creative energy.
Right. And it's not just fear either. He talks about it as this absence of light, like a dimming of our awareness, a way of kind of avoiding ourselves, which of course messes with our mood and our ability to connect with others.
And here's what I found really interesting, too. Despite how intense all that sounds, Noves is adamant that depression is curable. Especially, he says, through therapies that really dive into these deeper patterns and take into account our spiritual side.
Yeah, that focus on curability is so important. It offers real hope right from the start. And the fact that he talks about these deeper patterns, these like archetypal and spiritual aspects, suggests he's not just looking at the surface symptoms, but at the like root system of the problem.
To really emphasize this, there's a powerful quote from Jung that he includes, and I think it's worth mentioning. Jung says, people, when educated to see clearly the dark side of their own nature, learn at the same time to understand and love their neighbors. So facing our shadow, those like hidden parts of ourselves, is key.
Yeah, it's like acknowledging those darker parts, those aspects of ourselves we maybe try to avoid is actually crucial, not just for understanding ourselves, but for being able to connect with others in a healthier way.
Right, and the book's table of contents alone shows just how broad a view he takes on depression. It covers everything from overspending and financial problems to grief, major life changes, even the effects of medication and, the really difficult topic of suicide.
And he looks at how it connects to other challenges, explores the whole idea of the shadow, that Jungian concept, and even gets into things like cancer and relationship breakdowns. And then there are these internal or what he calls endogenous factors that he explores as well.
It's really a comprehensive look at how many different aspects of life can be tied to this one experience.
Exactly. And what's really interesting, too, is that he doesn't just dwell on the problems. The table of contents also lays out potential solutions. He talks about cure, about his spirituality, and gets into these states that might look like depression, but aren't quite the same thing. He looks at relapse, at the common feelings people go through, at the role of our inner energy, and what kinds of things can trigger an episode.
It's almost like a detailed map.
Absolutely. And he even gets into diagnostic ideas and the common symptoms, things that might make someone more susceptible to depression, and the potential psychological and spiritual reasons behind it. Then there are whole sections on treatment approaches and advice for people who are either currently struggling with depression or wanting to avoid it altogether.
I also really appreciated the dedication at the beginning of the book. Novis dedicates it to his patients, really acknowledging his own journey of learning from them and understanding their struggles.
Yeah, that humility is so important. It sets a really nice tone for the whole book.
It's not about claiming to have all the answers, but about learning and growing alongside others.
Exactly.
And speaking of learning, the introduction, titled Alchemia do Amor, really emphasizes how mysterious our inner world is. Novis argues that it can only be truly understood through symbols and those cultural expressions that we create.
And he uses this metaphor of internal alchemy to describe this incredible mix of things happening inside us. Chemical processes, nerve signals, emotions, thoughts, desires, willpower, and all powered by this inner energy that drives us.
And he makes this really important point that illness arises when all these things get out of sync,
Mm.
when that balance is off. And I think he provides a key early warning sign to be aware of: an intense inward focus on negative thoughts and feelings.
It's like getting stuck in that negativity, that internal loop.
To really highlight this connection to the unconscious, Novi's includes a dream scenario. It's about a woman who finds herself in a green field, and there's a house with two doors, one old and worn, the other newly painted. And inside, she encounters her father and brother. It's a really interesting setup. What do you make of that?
Well, the interpretation he offers is pretty fascinating. He suggests that the green field might represent a suppressed feeling of joy or ecstasy, perhaps related to a missed opportunity for a romantic connection. And the two doors, representing choices, right? Maybe between what's familiar but no longer working and something new and full of potential. Choosing the newer door, he says, signifies this leaning towards life, towards positivity and growth.
But then there's the father and brother, right? They add another layer.
Right. In this interpretation, they become symbols of deeply ingrained values and limits, particularly related to men and masculinity. It hints at these unconscious patterns that might be making it difficult for the woman to have healthy relationships with men and to experience sexuality freely, almost as if she needs permission from these internalized figures.
It's almost like she's carrying those expectations within herself.
Exactly. And then there's this detail about her climbing a small hill in the dream, which Noves interprets as a symbolic representation of her need for greater self-understanding, a need to rise above the situation and get a clearer perspective on what's happening inside her.
That's a great image, that climb. It suggests this journey of looking inward to gain a higher vantage point on your own inner world, right?
Exactly.
To really make sense of these dynamics that are often happening beneath the surface. And this leads into Nove's explanation of how our inner energy naturally flows back and forth between focusing on ourselves and connecting with others. He calls it auto and alter erotization.
And it's important to have a balance there. Too much focus on either side can be detrimental. In the dream example, the woman's desire for connection, which normally would flow outward, is turned inward, directed towards her unconscious.
Which isn't always a bad thing, but it can be, right?
Yeah. Well, Noves cautions that it can be a dangerous journey if you're not, mature enough or equipped to handle it consciously. And in this case, the woman questioning her own ability to cope wasn't enough to shift that inward flow.
It's like awareness is a good first step, but it often needs to be followed by action, by real change.
Absolutely. And the book emphasizes this really beautiful and hopeful idea that even with all this complexity, love is the fundamental force driving everything, both in life and in the universe. It's presented as both a reason for depression and, importantly, the key to healing it.
So love is both the problem and the solution.
It's more nuanced than that. It's like the absence of love, the lack of that outward connection, creates the conditions for depression. But love itself, when cultivated and directed appropriately, can also be the force that heals and brings us back to life. And, Noves then gets really personal. He shares his own first experience with depression, which happened when he was a teenager back in the 60s. He saw how it affected a family member during a time of massive social change. Think about the sexual revolution, women's liberation, all of that.
It was a time of upheaval for sure. A lot of things were being challenged.
And Noves points out that this period brought a lot of tensions to the surface, both within relationships and in society as a whole. It was a time when those hidden fears and anxieties were really coming out into the open.
He shares this very personal and, frankly, quite sad story of his sister's overdose after a bad breakup, and how she kind of withdrew into herself, becoming shy and really unsure of herself.
Yeah, it clearly had a huge impact on him, seeing someone he loved go through that.
It actually became a driving force for him to understand and ultimately try to help others overcome depression. But he also notes that his sister eventually did recover. And it was through family support and a better understanding of the intense emotions that come with being a teenager.
It's a good reminder that healing is possible. Even when things feel really dark, there's always a chance to find your way back.
The book then introduces this concept of compensatory regression, which is basically an unconscious way to try to avoid depression or a breakdown. He gives the example of a woman who separates from her partner and goes back to live with her parents.
Right, seeking that security and comfort of her childhood home.
Exactly. And while it provides that immediate comfort, Noves argues that it might actually be a way of delaying dealing with the deeper emotional issues.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches. It provides temporary relief, but it doesn't actually address the root of the problem.
He gives another example of a man who would regularly sleep at his mother's house after arguments with his wife. It showed this pattern of dependence on his mother and a frustration with his wife not being like her.
So again, seeking comfort in that familiar, almost childlike state, but avoiding the real issues in the marriage.
Exactly. And Novus suggests that in cases like this, depression might eventually emerge when this pattern is challenged,
Mhm.
when that safety net is removed.
Right, when they're forced to confront the things they've been avoiding.
He also talks about separation in general, noting that when a relationship ends, especially one where the feelings were mature and well expressed, there's sadness and grief, of course, but not necessarily depression. He presents separation as a normal part of growing up, of continuing on that journey of self-discovery.
It's almost like a shedding of an old skin, right? Making space for something new. And as painful as it can also be an opportunity for both individuals to find a new equilibrium, to grow in ways they might not have been able to within that old relationship.
It's a more nuanced way of looking at it, for sure. And he also doesn't shy away from the financial impact of separation. He points out that shared expenses become individual, often doubling the cost of living. And mothers with children, even with financial support, often have less than they did before. This financial pressure often justifies moving back in with parents, but he warns that this can actually mask underlying depression.
Yeah, it becomes this temporary solution that might actually be preventing the person from fully processing their emotions and moving on in a healthy way.
Right, it delays that necessary healing process. And then there's the emotional dynamic with parents to consider as well. Novis explains that even relying on parents just for financial support without actually living with them can initially create feelings of gratitude, but it can often shift into resentment.
Right, as the desire for independence clashes with the reality of needing help. And he draws this interesting parallel to children blaming parents for their perceived flaws. It's like this tendency to project responsibility outward.
It's like we're always looking for someone or something to blame.
And it can become a real obstacle to taking ownership of our own lives and making the necessary changes.
The book then gets into these kind of surface level ways that people who have separated might try to hide their distress. They might really focus on their appearance, try to look younger, diet, exercise, spend time with like younger, more available people.
It's like trying to create this image of still being desirable, of still having it all together.
Exactly. And they often avoid talking about the separation itself, seeking out company and advice from others who are in similar situations.
It's like finding comfort in shared misery, but also maybe avoiding that deeper self-reflection that's needed to truly move on.
Novi's suggests that this phase usually lasts until reality sets in, until they can no longer avoid the truth of the situation. And he notes that finding a new romantic relationship can actually delay or even prevent depression, at least temporarily.
It can be a way to fill that void, but it's not always a healthy or sustainable solution in the long run.
Right, it might just be putting off dealing with those deeper issues. And Noves then provides this really clear definition of depression as an emotional illness. He calls it morbid self-affectivity, which is basically this turning inward of our energy, this focus on ourselves in a negative way.
And it's important to distinguish that from healthy self-esteem. He's talking about a misdirection of energy, a fixation on an unresolved conflict. It's like taking all that energy that we normally use to engage with the world and turning it inward.
It's almost like we're feeding that negativity, making it stronger.
Right. And that can be really draining, both physically and emotionally.
There's also a helpful note in the book explaining Jung's concept of the shadow. It's described as those unconscious, often negative aspects of ourselves that we tend to project onto others.
And Novi stresses that integrating this shadow, becoming aware of those hidden parts of ourselves, is crucial for personal growth and for having healthier relationships. He points out that the shadow is the opposite of our persona, which is that social mask we present to the world.
It's like those two parts of ourselves are constantly in this dance, trying to find a balance.
And when we deny or repress our shadow, it can manifest in unhealthy ways. It's like trying to keep something locked up in the basement. It's only a matter of time before it finds a way out.
And he makes this really interesting observation that in depression, or even in the lead up to it, people often have a hard time expressing affection outwards to their loved ones. It's almost like that energy gets turned inward.
The care and attention they might have previously given freely to others starts to decrease as they become more and more focused on their own internal struggles.
Ah,
And their thoughts often get caught in this cycle of self-pity and excessive guilt, which can be really isolating.
It's like they're trapped in their own negativity.
And sometimes, Noves notes, that affection might actually be directed excessively towards specific people, like children or parents, almost as a way to compensate.
It's like that energy has to go somewhere, even if it's in an unbalanced way.
And in cases of separation, the affection that was once directed towards the marriage might shift towards these independent unconscious patterns. It can create some real complications in relationships.
He also talks about how differences in the intensity of feelings between partners can create problems, especially during arguments.
Right. One partner might feel like they're giving more and not getting enough back, and that can breed resentment. And Noves points out that people who tend to give a lot often expect a lot in return. It can create this unhealthy dynamic.
It's like they're trying to fill a void within themselves through the other person, but it's never enough.
And he suggests that finding that balance between caring for others and caring for yourself is really crucial in preventing these kinds of issues. And also trying to understand what's driving the other person in the relationship, not just focusing on your own needs and wants.
It's about seeing the relationship from both sides, having empathy.
Exactly. And he makes this interesting point that differences in intensity aren't necessarily a problem as long as you're aware of it and don't expect the other person to feel exactly the same way.
It's about accepting that people express their emotions differently.
And not trying to force them into some kind of mold that fits your own expectations.
He then describes this pattern he calls being addicted to falling in love, where people go from one relationship to another really quickly, unable to be alone.
They're constantly chasing that initial high, that excitement of a new romance, but it's often a way to avoid dealing with deeper issues, right?
Like they're afraid of that emptiness that might come from being alone with themselves.
And to illustrate the complexities of romantic relationships, Noves presents a case study of a 27-year-old woman who kept having these short-lived relationships. They always ended because she lost interest, even when her partners were completely devoted to her.
And she really struggled to understand why this kept happening.
Right. She initially thought it was because of her upbringing, how much she admired her father, which led her to have these, impossibly high standards.
But she sensed there was something deeper at play.
This is where Noves emphasizes the importance of taking a broader view, considering the person's whole life and those underlying patterns that have shaped them. It's about understanding their unique reason for being, not just looking at surface-level factors.
It's about getting to the heart of their motivation, their deepest desires.
And this brings us to the challenges of loneliness and the role of hope in navigating those feelings. Noves beautifully describes hope as the constant companion of the lonely lover, sustaining their patience through long periods of waiting, listening to music, rereading old letters, writing in diaries, dreaming of that reunion.
It's like they're clinging to that hope for dear life.
And sometimes that hope can be a really powerful force, keeping them going. But Noves also cautions that if this longing continues without resolution, it can eventually lead to a deepening depression.
It's like hope deferred makes the heart sick, right?
And he suggests that at some point, it becomes necessary to reevaluate your life and actively seek out a new path towards happiness rather than just passively waiting for things to change.
It's about taking control of your own destiny. And he also talks about the difficulties of free time when you're lonely. When your mind isn't occupied, that's when the absence of a desired companion can become really acute, really painful.
Right. And it can easily lead to those depressive feelings. And while you might be tempted to just distract yourself with mindless activities, Noves suggests engaging in more meaningful pursuits, things that have a real sense of purpose.
So rather than just escaping, it's about creating something new, something that gives your life direction.
Exactly. And he argues that ultimately a deeper connection with your own soul, with those unconscious parts of yourself, is what's needed to truly understand the meaning of your existence.
It's not just about finding a partner, it's about finding yourself.
Right, and finding that inner sense of wholeness and purpose.
The book then describes this gradual loss of interest in the outside world, a fading of its color and significance. The connections we normally make between events and activities start to break down. Even simple pleasures in our routines, like stopping by a bookstore after lunch or having a coffee break with friends, are forgotten.
It's like life loses its flavor.
And it adds to this overall feeling of dissatisfaction, of just emptiness.
And this dimming of awareness can also lead to a withdrawal from communication.
Yeah.
You might notice yourself becoming more silent, less likely to smile,
It's like you're retreating into yourself, shutting down.
And he describes this avoidance of conscious life as a kind of defense mechanism, comparing it to a millipede curling up when it feels threatened. It's like your ego, your sense of self, feels overwhelmed and retreats inward for protection.
And he compares it to the paranoia of someone who is delirious, seeking pity and safety. It paints a pretty stark picture.
Right. It's like you're trapped in your own internal world, afraid to engage with the outside.
And Noves cautions that attempts by others to spark motivation through social activities, while they might provide some temporary relief, often aren't effective in the long run.
Yeah, because they're not addressing the root of the problem, right? They're just distractions. And he emphasizes the importance of providing support that helps the person actually confront those underlying issues.
It's about addressing the cause, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of seeking professional help, because without it, those attempts at social engagement might just become another form of avoidance.
It's about finding a therapist who can guide you through that process of unpacking those deeper emotional patterns.
Absolutely. And the book then makes this really helpful distinction between what it calls the sense of living and the meaning of life. This sense of living is something that should always be present in our awareness. It's about having those immediate personal reasons for our existence.
It's those things that get us out of bed in the morning, right? Those little joys and goals that make life feel worthwhile on a daily basis.
Exactly. And Nova suggests that it encompasses all sorts of things: material goals, professional ambitions, emotional connections, religious beliefs, physical well-being, you name it. It's like this personal collection of motivations that drives our actions and choices.
And then there's the meaning of life, which is this much broader, more philosophical idea.
And he argues that the connection between those two, between the meaning of life and our individual sense of existence, should become really solid in adulthood after we've gone through those common life experiences.
It's like those experiences help us refine our understanding of what truly matters.
And he suggests that our awareness should then focus on those immediate goals that actually contribute to that bigger meaning of life. That's where we find fulfillment in that integration.
It's like everything starts to click into place.
And depression, he says, can be seen as the absence of that sense of meaning in our own lives. It's like we've lost that connection to what makes life feel worthwhile.
And he points out that the frustration of not achieving certain goals can wear away at our sense of purpose.
Right. It's like those unmet expectations chip away at our motivation. And he suggests that bringing back that old meaning or finding new meaning should be a gradual and realistic process.
It's not about setting ourselves up for further disappointment.
And he cautions against alienating ourselves from our own sense of personal destiny, from that path that feels uniquely ours to walk.
It's about embracing who we are and what we're meant to do in this life.
And he stresses that introducing reasons to live should be done consciously and realistically to avoid getting caught up in those childish fantasies that might set us up for failure.
It's about having goals that are both meaningful and achievable.
And Noves argues that conscious life needs at least one purpose, even if it's initially something material or pleasure-driven. But ideally, he suggests, our goals should evolve to become more spiritual than just purely material.
It's like we're always striving for something more, something deeper.
And the meaning we find strengthens our awareness of our own existence, helping to prevent us from being overwhelmed by the unconscious. It's like finding that anchor within ourselves.
And when that sense of life, that feeling of purpose starts to fade, that's when the risk of depression increases.
Right. It's like that inner light starts to dim.
And he really emphasizes the importance of taking back that internal control, regaining our self-assurance, and actively working to reshape our lives.
It's about empowerment, about taking ownership of our own healing journey.
Now, he shares this really intriguing story about a priest who had passed away. Years later, this priest was drawn to a woman in his former church because of her constant prayers for her son. He felt this strong, familiar connection to the son's youthful vitality, even though he didn't consciously understand why.
It's almost like he was drawn to that life force, that energy.
And the son, who was unaware of the spirit's presence, felt both sadness and inner joy at the same time. He asked his mother to pray for him, and afterwards he felt much better. Noves uses this as an example of how those unseen connections, those maybe even spiritual needs, can influence our emotional states.
It's a really fascinating example of the interconnectedness of things, even beyond what we can perceive with our senses.
It gets you thinking about those unseen forces that might be at play in our lives. And this leads into a discussion of religion and spirituality, which can be a sensitive topic.
Right. But Novus approaches it with a lot of nuance. He points out that turning to religion is this ancient human practice for dealing with problems that seem unsolvable. It's a way to seek help on material, psychological, and spiritual levels. And he notes that even people who consider themselves rational might turn to religious or mystical experiences when other methods fail.
It's like we're all searching for something to hold on to, something to give us hope.
And religion can provide that framework, that sense of meaning and purpose. And he suggests that it can act as this kind of psychological anchor, providing a hopeful idea that might prevent us from fully confronting the core of our suffering. It's like it gives us something to focus on, something to believe in that can offer some relief from that inner turmoil.
It's like a temporary reprieve, a way to gather strength.
Right. But he cautions that while this reconnection to religion can be comforting, it rarely brings a complete cure on its own. It's more like a support system than a solution in and of itself.
It might be a starting point, but it's not the whole journey.
And he makes an exception, stating that only when depression stems from a really deep disappointment in religious beliefs can religion actually offer a complete cure. But in other cases, he stresses that turning to religion isn't inherently negative or a way to escape. In fact, it can be a really important step in healing.
It's about finding that connection to something bigger than ourselves, something that gives our lives meaning.
And he concludes this section by arguing that a religious or spiritual search is fundamental for all of us, as it represents that connection with something deep within, something close to the divine.
And he suggests that seeking that higher power outside of ourselves can actually lead to recognizing the divine within.
It's like it's a journey of both outward exploration and inward discovery.
And that sincere search, he argues, is a really powerful antidote to depression because it helps us see our conflicts as opportunities for growth rather than things to avoid.
It's about reframing those challenges as lessons, as stepping stones on our path.
The book then takes a look at societal systems, questioning whether they actually contribute to depression.
And while some might blame capitalism and its emphasis on personal gain and competition, Novas suggests that this tendency to seek advantage is just part of human nature, not specific to any particular system.
It's like, even if we change the system, we might still find ourselves struggling with the same internal conflicts.
And he argues that simply changing the system without individuals also changing might not actually lead to greater happiness.
It's about that inner transformation as well.
And he discusses the ideal of a system based on everyone working for the common good, but raises the question of whether everyone actually has the same capacity or willingness to serve.
It's a valid point. We're all different, with different strengths and weaknesses.
And experiences around the world, he says, have shown that those systems that are based on collective good require people who are psychologically prepared and actively engaged to really function well.
It's like we can't just rely on external structures to make us happy. It's also about our own inner state and our willingness to contribute.
And then he makes this really interesting statement that, contrary to what many believe, the tendency towards depression is actually something we're born with.
What? We're wired for it.
It's not quite like that. It's more like we all have this innate connection to the unconscious, and our ego, our conscious awareness, guides that connection. And he argues that falling into depression is fundamentally about fear, about being afraid of those challenges that life inevitably throws our way.
So it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility that's always there.
And he elaborates on that by explaining that at the core of every psychological problem, including depression, is what he calls an unconscious complex.
What does that mean?
It's like these pockets of unresolved experiences or emotion that haven't been fully processed. And they can be activated by certain triggers, even if we're not consciously aware of them.
So it's like we're carrying this baggage around without even realizing it.
And it can really weigh us down.
He also talks about the importance of social connection, even in small doses. He stresses that maintaining even brief in-person contact with friends is really important. Phone calls, he says, just don't provide that same kind of energy exchange.
It's about that face-to-face interaction, that feeling of really being seen and heard.
And he identifies another potential trigger for depression, especially for introverted individuals, and that's a combination of persistent sadness and constant irritation.
Right. It can signal this underlying dissatisfaction with oneself and a difficulty in managing your emotions.
Like you're at war with yourself.
And he suggests that persistent sadness can indicate an unmet need or desire that's been placed on life or another person, and that irritation might come from a lack of tolerance and an overvaluing of your own opinions.
It's like you're stuck in your own head, unable to see things from other perspectives.
And he describes these individuals as becoming easily depressed when they're constantly opposed. And they often crave a lot of affection, but have a hard time admitting it.
It's like they need that validation, that reassurance, but they're afraid to ask for it directly.
And they might even look down on others who show neediness. It's a defense mechanism.
And they tend to devalue the affection that is given to them, dismissing it as just sentimentality.
It's like they can't accept that someone might genuinely care for them.
It's a sad situation.
And Noves suggests that these individuals are often emotionally immature, rigid in their thinking, and rely on cliches or those cold, rational explanations to avoid facing their true feelings.
It's like they've built up these walls around their hearts.
And what they really need is love, nurturing, acceptance, and to develop that emotional maturity to break free from that negativity.
It's a journey of self-discovery and healing.
Absolutely.
And then he talks about those individuals who haven't really taken the time to consider their own existence, the bigger questions about life and purpose. He describes them as being disconnected from their inner spiritual being, living almost like zombies on the verge of depression.
It's like they're going through the motions without really feeling alive.
And they're stuck in this materialistic, concrete world, unaware of the spiritual dimension.
And he argues that they desperately need a higher reason to live, a mystical or profound experience, to help them understand that their physical life is just one part of a much larger journey.
It's about finding that spark, that connection to something beyond the everyday.
And he emphasizes the need for a spiritual search, but not one that involves blindly following rules or dogma.
It's about finding your own path, your own connection to something greater.
Exactly.
Now, he gets into this really concerning idea about how depression can actually be contagious. Being around someone who is depressed for a long time can increase your own likelihood of developing depression.
It's like that negativity can seep into your own energy field.
And he explains that constantly trying to fight their negativity, to lift their spirits, can be incredibly draining for those who are close to them, eventually affecting their own emotional state.
It's like you're constantly giving away your own energy, trying to fill a bottomless pit.
And he also cautions that focusing too much on someone who is depressed can actually keep them stuck in that state of neediness, making it harder for them to recover. It's a delicate balance.
Right. It's about providing support without enabling that dependence.
And Noves really stresses the importance of setting boundaries, of not taking on too much responsibility for someone else's healing process.
Because it can really take a toll on you, both emotionally and physically.
He actually uses a pretty strong image, saying that depressed individuals can suck the energy from those around them, especially if the caregiver believes they're